Okay, I've tried to do this video before, and I got a result that I wasn't happy with. And I think it's because I tried to I had like 4 examples of this, 3 that I thought were good, and 1 I thought was not good. And it just got repetitive though. So this time, just 1 example, and this is a video that every time I think about making, I think to myself, this is just all really obvious. But then I see people say things, and it makes me think it isn't obvious. So, um, good authors whose action scenes I like generally do a really good job of having characterization in their action, and that in this basically is going to be a video about that. So I'm going to talk about a little bit like why I think this, and then I'm going to give an example, which I wanted an example that was not too long, that really I think did a good job of illustrating the concept, and also would be spoiler free. So I got one, chapter 1, page 1 of The Rage of Dragons. So this isn't going to be, it's past the prologue, but the stuff here is completely unrelated to the prologue. So it shouldn't spoil anyone. Anyways, let's get into it. So first, I just want to quickly talk about like action in the medium for books, because the kind of intuition would be that like movie action or film action has a lot of inherent advantages over action in books, because action tends to be very visual, and I mean movies you can watch that, but books I actually prefer a really well written action scene to a really well filmed and acted and choreographed action scene. And I think books, they have a lot of disadvantages, but books have 2 advantages. One is more specific to fantasy, well, just bigger stuff, but one really big one. And the first is just budget. It costs just as much to burn everything down in a book as it does to not burn everything down in a book. There's no limit on, like, there are action scenes in some books that, like, are unfilmable as they're written because the budget would be $17 quadrillion. But the main advantage that books have in action scenes is that you have direct access to the thoughts of at least one character. If you're an omniscient, technically multiple characters, and you can use those thoughts to add to the storytelling. And I am someone who basically, obviously this is, if someone out there likes written blow-by-blow action, they're not wrong to like that. I totally don't get it. But when I say good in the context of this video, I will be meaning not objectively good, because technically, like, you're not wrong if you prefer blow-by-blow action, but I'm considering good to be an action scene that is both important to the narrative and that adds to the story. And also, obviously, it should have, like, clarity and intensity in the things that are more traditionally attributed to an action scene. Like, if you have an action scene that's just a really long internal monologue or something, that might be important to the characters or story, but also, they should feel tense. But I'm going to be focusing more on the way that action can contribute to characterization, both for, like, establishing a character through characterization or showing the development of a character. And I'm going to be using this, and also how it can be used for story. I'm kind of someone, I guess this isn't just true for action scenes, this is true for most scenes, arguably, but I kind of think if there's an action scene, and if you, like a long action scene, and if the author could have swapped out that entire action scene with, like, a 1-sentence summary, and it has no impact on the story or characters or the reader's knowledge of the setting or themes, then I don't think it did a good job of being an action scene in a book. So, Rage of Dragons, chapter 1, I am going to be going through literally 1 page, and we're going to see how much we know about not just the person, not just Tao, who we're in Tao's perspective for this action scene, but 3 characters are involved in this, and I'm going to kind of show how much we can learn about 3 characters from 1 page that involves hitting people with swords, while also at least I am able to picture this action scene quite well. Because, for those who don't know, Evan Winter is for fights, not for battles. I think his big, large-scale battles maybe sometimes leave something to be desired. But his fight scenes are my favorite in the genre. And it's partially because of, like, how intense and thrilling it is. But it's partially because, despite there being a lot of them, I actually think every action scene in the 2 books we have gotten has contributed to the story in some way. So, Tao stumbled as he avoided the petty noble's swing. He tried to regain his footing, but Jabari was on him, and he had to hop backwards to survive the larger man's attack. So, this sentence doesn't have much in terms of characterization. This is really just to set the scene, so you can kind of picture Tao, who we don't just know that there's a fighting scene on, this has delivered some world building. Tao calling Jabari a petty noble suggests he isn't a petty noble, and that the societal ranking and his ranking as a petty noble is significant. He's describing him as a petty noble before he describes him at his name, and also that he's larger. And we don't know at this point if Jabari just happens to be a petty noble or happens to be larger, but we know that he is fighting. He's kind of losing, like he's stumbling, and that's probably not a good thing in a fight. And he's smaller than the larger man, Jabari. "Come on, Tao. You can't always run," Aaron yelled from outside the fighting circle, the words made indistinct by the booming of the ocean below. So here we're not expressly told it's a training scene, but this effectively tells us, like, okay, these people are not seriously trying to kill each other. These are people training, because generally, if you're actually trying to kill each other, there's not someone on the sidelines shouting, like, you can't always run. And also, obviously, him shouting that tells us something about Tao, that Tao is historically not particularly interested in being violent, that in general, when he has conflict with Jabari, it's more just him trying to not get hit, and he doesn't do that much active attacking against Jabari, and it's just kind of like, he fights very defensively. And also, Fitz also manages to give us a little bit more on the setting. We now know that they're on a coast, and not only are they on a coast, they are on a coast that is in a storm, and they're practicing fighting in a storm. And if you have storms infrequently, there's a good chance you take the day off. So the fact that they're still practicing the storm means either, one, they're very devoted, but we already kind of have a hint from Tao that he isn't that devoted, because he always runs away, and he's stumbling, and is generally not doing very well. So the other alternative is that the booming of the ocean below, which means there are big waves, which come from strong winds, is just normal. And that the ocean being extremely hostile right next to this coast is just a totally normal thing, so you're not going to change your day-to-day task. Tao's sword arm was numb, and he couldn't wait for the day's training to be done. So yeah, we have Tao. This is his first actual internal monologue. The first thing Tao thinks about this scene is that basically he's tired and he doesn't want to be here. This is not someone who is training to sword fight because, like, he's really motivated to be good at sword fighting. He's training at sword fighting because he has some duty. He has to, basically. "I'm baiting him," he lied, as Jabari pushed him closer to the cliffs. Another step, and Tao would be out of the fighting circle, losing him the match. And this is, again, more setting up just so we can physically picture it, and we now know the larger Jabari, who is presumably of another social caste, is pushing back Tao, and Tao is saying he's baiting him, which kind of suggests he somewhat cares what Aaron thinks, because if someone is telling you you can't always run and you don't really care what you think, you don't bother to lie and say, like, an excuse, you just move on. But he kind of, for some reason, wants this character, Aaron, who we know is the person running the training, but don't know anything about at this point. So it's kind of suggested that, therefore, he somewhat cares what Aaron thinks, which is kind of weird because he seems to not care about this training, so it kind of makes you wonder why he cares about what Aaron thinks. Oh, and also it mentions cliffs again, which obviously we knew it was by the coast. We now know it's cliffs by the coast, so we know that They're on some kind of landmark by cliffs, so like a cliff drop, and then there's water, and that water has very rough conditions and large waves, and that's probably somewhat normal. For Aaron's benefit, and to prove he'd learned something that season, Tao made a half-hearted attack, cutting for Jabari's leg. But Jabari bashed the sword aside and launched a counter, catching him on the wrist. This, it kind of a little bit more clearly shows that he really doesn't care that much about this training or the fighting for his own sake. He's trying to basically do better just because he cares about what this Aaron character thinks about him. The fact that he's a training this, is a hint of their relationship, whether it's some kind of mentor-trainee or father-son, which you could probably at this point guess that it's father-son, because if you're really paying attention, because if it's mentor-trainee and he really cares about what Aaron thinks, like, why he would probably care more about the training, which he doesn't. Like, his definition of, like, I'm gonna do a good job and care is a attack he literally described as half-hearted. So it's just, we kind of can infer that the normal training with Jabari is basically him being on the defensive, and he's wildly outmatched and doesn't really care about it that much. Also, Jabari, like, you can see why he doesn't attack that much, because the second he does a cautious attack, he just instantly gets hit on the wrist.
Tao yelped, and having had enough, was about to step out of the circle when Jabari leapt forward, swinging for him. Tao threw himself back, hoping to avoid being hit again, but his heel hit one of the stones marking the circle's boundaries, and he went down with enough force to wind him.
And here in the final section of the first page, we see we really see how not motivated Tao is for this whole fighting thing. He literally got hit once by the wrist, and he's doing the equivalent of tapping out. So we see, like, he just doesn't care about winning. He's not motivated to win, and this doesn't really have the motivation to withstand any kind of pain. Like, we directly see that given the choice of where he's at right now, between experiencing a little bit more pain and losing, he will choose to lose and to give up. And I think for characterization and action scene, it would be spoilery, but I think if you've read the book, I could contrast this with some later scenes in this book, and you could, just by reading 2 pages of different action scenes, you could tell that Tao has gone through some character growth, even if I think that's the less important part of his character arc. But that is a story for another time. This is future me, because past me randomly forgot to actually talk about this last paragraph. But anyways, it has more stuff. So there you go. And I just wanted to communicate that I think even for an author who, like, really puts a lot into his action, like, you can tell Evan Winter likes writing action. He wants stories that really involve lots of violence and action scenes. Because, Rage of Dragons and Fire's Vengeance both have a lot of action scenes. You can tell, even from the first page of Chapter 1, that in this action scene, what it means for the characters involved is a lot more important than the actual physical move. The physical descriptions of the scene are not, like, ultra detailed. You can tell, reading this, that what matters to the story is what's going on in Tao's head, and that Evan Winter cares about the action scenes for how those action scenes affect people and affect the story and can affect the world, not for an action scene just for the sake of an action's sake. And I would actually make the case that in Rage of Dragons, and as far as I can remember, Fires of Vengeance, there isn't a single action. There's a lot of action scenes, and I don't think a single one of them is just there for the sake of there being an action scene. There always is some other purpose that it provides. And I think this is probably true of most really good action writers. Like, I think most of my favorite, if you ask me, like, who are your favorite action writers, almost all of them are people who give enough description of what's going on so I can picture what's going on in my head, because it's harder for me to picture, like, and I think for most people, to picture, like, ultra detailed action, and it's not a very efficient way to write because it's just not using the medium to your advantage. This is one of those scenarios where a picture really does speak 1,000 words, and fights are very complicated, and it would be like if you were to, I don't know, go to a short UFC fight and try to actually describe it in sufficient detail so that someone could understand everything that happened, it would just be so long and borderline unreadable. And I think all my favorite action writers give me enough that I can picture things and focus more on what it contributes to the story. And that is, so when I say something has really good action, I usually mean, there are also some people who just write more exciting and thrilling action, but usually it's also for how that author has action contribute to the story. So, like, that's one page, right? And I would make the case that's quite a bit of characterization for a page. And I just kind of wanted to make this video and read a page to kind of just say, like, this is what I consider to be a good action scene. Also, I think, like, we didn't get a super detailed description of the action, but I actually can probably picture it better than we can a super detailed description of the action. Like, we only know of, like, a couple moves, and yet I can kind of picture the larger Jabari kind of bullying Tao around the corner, and Tao being very defensive, and then just kind of going for one half, like, little attack at his leg, and then immediately getting countered and hit. And then Jabari, like, after hitting Tao, doesn't, like, step back in training like, I hit you. He then, like, drives him out of the circle. So you can see the training also. When in the training, it isn't just hitting people. Like, this is a fake match. Like, and he's practicing trying to win, not just his technique. That's all I got. I also had the other examples. I had a scene from Goblet of Fire where I want to point out that you could have a scene that characterized people, but also that the characters don't have to be interesting, because as can be the case, you can do an excellent job of characterizing a character and characterization and communicating things to the reader about those characters, and those characters can just not be interesting. I actually do find the characters in The Rage of Dragons interesting, and pretty quickly so, but doesn't always have to be the case. Voldemort, not a character I found interesting. And then I had one from, like, the end of Words of Radiance that I think is really fantastic, but obviously it was spoilery. So I'm just going for the page 1 of Rage of Dragons. But basically, the message of this is don't skim action scenes, and that action scenes can be really important for the story. And that they can be, like, they can communicate a lot of important stuff about the setting, the characters, or advance the plot. And yeah, I wanted to make a video about it. Bye, everyone.